Welcome back. We hope that you enjoyed the delicious lunch. Next, we have our third panel, Oppression and Strife, chaired by Dr. Sevgi Adak, an associate professor in gender and Middle East studies and head of research at AKU-ISMC. This panel will feature presentations from our lovely co-convener, Zeinab Nikookar, Sophia Leathers, Farid Bahader, and Anila Bano.
Shall I start? Yes. Thank you, Nour. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third panel of the conference. Let me join my colleagues in thanking the organizers, Nour, Nabil, and Zeinab, and also our colleagues that were on the selection committee for putting together such an impressive list of papers. So in the interest of time, we will just start right away, and we will start with Zeinab.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And my presentation is on rape and sexual violence, an analysis of international wars beyond the front lines. So this presentation explores a critical yet often overlooked dimension of warfare, the systematic use of sexual violence and rape as tools of war. While traditional warfare is well documented, the violence inflicted on civilian populations, particularly women, remains a shadow conflict that continues to this day. This study focuses on the deliberate use of sexual violence to terrorize and destabilize communities. Drawing upon historical and contemporary examples such as the Iran-Iraq War and the Gaza conflict, I examined these cases and I argue that sexual violence in war is not incidental, but a calculated strategy aimed at dismantling societal structures by targeting women, thus striking at the core of communities' honor and dignity. My paper will also challenge the Eurocentric focus of much existing literature on wartime sexual violence and highlights how these crimes are systematically ignored or justified in the context of geopolitical power structures, especially in the Middle East. Central to this inquiry is the question, how do gender dimensions of war manifest beyond the physical battlefield? And why are the narratives of sexual violence, particularly in non-Western contexts, so frequently silenced? The methodology of this presentation is comparative case study analysis that draws on both historical and contemporary examples of wartime sexual violence. This presentation uses qualitative analysis to examine instances of sexual violence in various conflicts, such as the Iran-Iraq War through oral narratives, photographs, and testimonies focusing on the cultural and societal responses to sexual violence in the Iranian context, and also the Hamas-Israel conflict by analyzing reports, testimonies, and statements from survivors, international organizations like the UN, and human rights groups such as Amnesty International. The background of my presentation is as follows. In conflicts like those in Bosnia and Rwanda, sexual violence has served dual purposes: to terrorize communities and dismantle their social fabric. For example, during the Rwandan genocide, the mass rape of Tutsi women by Hutu forces was not isolated, but part of a broader genocidal campaign aimed at ethnic erasure. These acts underscore the strategic role that rape plays in undermining the very existence of a population. Beyond the physical act of violence, the pervasive fear of rape enforces compliance and submission. In many conflicts, the threat of rape is used to control and punish entire communities. Victims suffer from devastating psychological effects, including fear, disorientation, and long-term trauma. These impacts ripple across societies, exacerbated by cultural stigma and shame, and often leading to severe consequences like honor killings or social ostracism. In patriarchal societies, rape is more than an assault on the individual, but it is an attack on familial and communal honor. This dynamic is particularly evident in Middle Eastern conflicts, where the cultural weight of honor amplifies the trauma of sexual violence and often results in the silencing of victims to protect societal pride. The psychological toll of rape in war extends far beyond the individual and destabilizes the entire communities. Survivors frequently face re-victimization through societal exclusion, while their stories are buried under the broader political narrative. For example, in Iran, the cultural shame surrounding sexual violence during the Iran-Iraq War has suppressed many survivors' stories and left them the trauma. The claims of the main points of my presentations are as follows. Despite our overwhelming evidence, many cases of wartime sexual violence remain absent from official records. Societal taboos and cultures of silence perpetuate this erasure, particularly in the context of the Middle East, where patriarchal norms further compound the issue. Survivors of wartime rape are often subjected to secondary violence, not only from their attackers, but also from their own communities. Women who have been raped may be shunned, isolated, or even killed by their families in an effort to restore honor. These actions intensify the survivor's trauma, further marginalizing them from social and legal support systems. Many societies normalize violence against women, particularly in conflict settings, and reducing rape to an almost invisible crime, leaving it as an unpunished crime in the wartime. This normalization is deeply rooted in patriarchal values, which view women's bodies as commodities controlled by men. Consequently, judicial systems often fail to treat sexual violence with the seriousness it deserves, especially in conflict zones. Rape during wartime often goes unpunished due to the breakdown of legal systems and the perception that such violence is inevitable. So, however, rape is a deliberate and systematic tactic of war and is intended to destroy communities and exert control. The persistent lack of accountability underscores the broader impunity joined by the soldiers in conflict zones. Even after the cessation of hostilities, survivors of sexual violence remain silenced. Institutional and cultural barriers prevent victims from seeking justice, ensuring that their stories are rarely heard. Peace agreements typically overlook the suffering of rape survivors and perpetuate a cycle of impunity and silence. So the two case studies, as I mentioned, are the Iran-Iraq War and the Hamas-Israeli conflict, which is like happening right now. The Iran-Iraq War saw horrifying instances of sexual violence, with Iraqi soldiers employing it as a tool to degrade and dismantle Iranian communities. In cities like Susangerd, women and children were abducted, raped, and in some cases killed. One vivid example includes Iraqi officers selecting young girls, raping them, and then murdering them in front of their helpless mothers. The issue of sexual violence during the war has often been overlooked in written records, with only a few oral narratives available. The strategic use of rape was deeply tied to the concept of honor within the Iranian community during the war. The shame and stigma surrounding rape meant that many victims' stories remain untold, as addressing these atrocities publicly was considered a social taboo. A war photographer recounted one of his missions to the war zone. 4 years before the end of the war, I was sent to the south as a reporter for a magazine and saw the mass grave of women who were killed by the Iraqis. I don't remember where and in which village I saw this grave, but after returning, I published the photos in the magazine. The publication of these photos faced many objections. He continued, in 1986, Iraqis raped and killed women in the Bostan region. In some parts of the region, memorials were built for women, and inscriptions were placed on the hills stating, "We honor your memory." When I returned 2 years later, all the signs had been removed, as if it was a shameful stain on the land. Sexual violence has also been reported during the ongoing Hamas-Israel conflict, though the extent of these crimes remain contested. On October 7, 2023, during attacks by Hamas fighters, reports from Israeli sources allege that widespread sexual violence, including gang rape and mutilation of female hostages, occurred. Testimonies from survivors, witnesses, and military personnel suggest that Hamas militants used rape as a deliberate tool of terror. Patton, the UN's Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, addressed this issue, noting that while her team found reasonable grounds to believe sexual violence took place, they could not definitively assess its scale or whether it was part of an organized strategy. Her team identified several verified cases, including rape and/or gang rape, and credible witness testimony pointed to instances of rape involving corpses. However, Patton stressed that the limited number of confirmed cases does not imply that there were no others. Israel's representative at the UN cited these findings to defend Israel's ongoing military actions. On the Palestinian side, there have long been allegations of sexual violence committed by Israeli forces, though these claims have frequently been downplayed due to the political sensitivities involved. Amnesty International and other organizations have documented instances of Palestinian women facing sexual harassment and assault by Israeli military personnel. However, the lack of formal investigations has made it difficult to verify these claims comprehensively. The UN's Special Reporter on Violence Against Women, As-Salem, stated that there were credible allegations of Palestinian women being sexually assaulted while in Israeli detention. At least 2 verified cases of rape were reported, alongside numerous cases of sexual humiliation and threats of rape. She noted that the true extent of these crimes may be significantly higher, as many cases go unreported due to the fear of the cultural stigma surrounding sexual violence. And there are lots of reports that Palestinian women have said that while we were hostages of IDF, they threatened us with our naked photos. In Palestinian communities, women are often doubly victimized, first by their attackers, then by their own families, who may ostracize them due to the concepts of familial honor. This silencing ensures that many women cannot seek justice, compounding their trauma and perpetuating a cycle of impunity. Sexual violence in war remains one of the most underreported and misunderstood dimensions of conflict. Despite various international agreements and frameworks aimed at addressing these atrocities, the complexities of stigma, political agendas, and societal taboos ensures that many cases remain hidden. This is particularly true in communities where honor plays a significant role, as seen in the case of Iran, where narratives of rape were suppressed and survivors were silenced. The case of Hamas and Israel illustrates the continued weaponization of sexual violence, with both sides making accusations, yet facing difficulties in substantiating claims due to the sensitive nature of these crimes and the inherent limitations of wartime investigations. the plight of Palestinian women, especially those facing the dual burden of occupation and patriarchal norms, underscores the need for greater attention to the victims of such violence who remain caught between geopolitical struggles and deeply entrenched social customs. International efforts must focus not only on the prosecution and prevention, but also on breaking the silence that surrounds these crimes by amplifying the voices of survivors and ensuring that justice mechanisms are trauma sensitive. The global community can move toward a more comprehensive response to sexual violence in conflicts. However, until societies confront the stigma attached to these crimes and hold perpetrators accountable, the cycle of silence and impunity is likely to persist.
Thank you, Zeinab, for this very timely, I would say, paper. Also, thank you for sticking to the time. Our next speaker is Farid Bahader from IAS. Farid?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farid, and today I'll be talking about temple destruction and the imposition of Jizya tax by Aurangzeb. And basically, I'll be exploring his underlying motivations of doing all these things. But before going further, as Doctor mentioned that why we are discussing a 17th century guy nowadays, why we are discussing a guy who seems not much relevant in today's world, but I'd say he's relevant and he's very much relevant. Especially in social media, if you see for the last couple of years, he has been the center point of debate among the community in India that he has a religious bigotry against Hindus, and he wanted to eliminate all the Hindus from the Indian from India, from the subcontinent. And this has affected the Muslim community in India as well. The non-Muslims use the word the slang for the Muslims, like Aurangzeb ki aulad, yani the progeny of Aurangzeb, and you should not stay here. You should go to like Pakistan or wherever you want. And again, they are changing the roads. There used to be a road called named as Aurangzeb Road. Now they have changed it to something else. They are also changing the textbooks. Like if you can see in the image here, it used to be there in the 12th grade textbook a couple of years ago, but now you won't find it. It's a 30-page. It was a 30-page chapter on Mughal history, but now you won't find it. So basically, the Muslims in India are being marginalized because of what has been done in the past by the Mughal emperor, especially Aurangzeb. But the thing is, like, we have to see that how he has been portrayed in Indian media. So I'd be exploring that. Was he a religious tyrant? Did he have an anti-Hindu bigotry, or was he a strategist who wanted to expand his empire and he was working based on realpolitik? Before going further, we would have a brief introduction of who Aurangzeb was. Basically, he was the 6th Mughal emperor and who fought with 3 of his brothers for the throne, and the prominent among them was Dara Shikoh. Historians usually say that if Dara Shikoh would have succeeded to the throne, the scenario in India would have been very different. Even they say that there might not have been partition of Pakistan in India. But how we see this thing, like we will discuss it later on. And again, he imprisoned his father for 7 years when he succeeded to the throne. And basically he was a cruel king and did everything which he found necessary for his ambition to expand his empire. And again, two important things which needs to be mentioned here when we say that he was a religious fundamentalist. He was in a romantic relationship with a Hindu girl, but fortunately or unfortunately, we don't know, she died, right? She died and he couldn't marry her. And he was a good veena player, which is usually associated with Hindu religion, though the word Hindu is, again, problematic because it's a colonial term, but in modern times, it's affiliated with Hindu religion. According to his wish, he was buried near the Dargah of Sheikh Zainuddin, who was a Chishti Sufi and his spiritual and religious master. And we know that the Sufis in India are quite liberal, and they try to accommodate every religion. It's not like they're not like the religious fundamentalists. And now we can also see that during his time, the Mughal Empire expanded a lot. You can see in the pink color here, it all happened during Aurangzeb's era. The thing I want to emphasize here by showing you this map is that he was a strategist. He was a good politician. That's why he expanded his empire that much. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. And it was the largest expansion in Mughals history. So when we are discussing this figure, there are two prominent figures in India which we refer to. One is Jadunath Sarkar and Munni Lal. They have probably like same kind of argument. They say that he had religious bigotry against non-Muslims, and he tried to destroy all the temples and schools of the infidels, yani Hindus. And Jadunath Sarkar mentions several occasions like Shavrai's temple destruction in 1670 and demolition of Somnath temple, and the imposition of Jizya tax on non-Muslim in 1679. And again, he also says that he dismissed all the Hindu clerks from office just with one stroke of his pen. So we will discuss all these things, that how much there is reality in those arguments, and we have to consider this thing as well, that in which timeline these scholars operated. You can see these writings came up when the Britishers were there in India, and probably these writers, I would argue, that they were operating under this notion of divide and rule policy of the colonizers. Like he mentions so many occasions and tries to give a sentimental touch to why these temples were demolished. But on the other hand, we have another story, and the prominent figure in that is Richard Eaton. He states that the history of temple destruction goes back to pre-modern era in India, even before the Mughal arrived there. Basically, these temples used to they used to be called as Kuldavata, in which the kingship was created, legitimized, and revitalized. And whenever a king was attacking another king, or another Raja, he used to demolish his temple in order to show that now he has the authority over that area. So this was how things were happening, and Richard Eaton identifies 81 instances within 5 centuries in which this thing happened, in which temples were demolished. For example, one of them, which I have mentioned here, it states in 642 AD, the Pallava king Narasimhavarman attacked the Chalukyas and destroyed the royal temple, looting their state deity from their capitals. Such actions of destroying royal temples and looting the central deity were carried out with the explicit aim of detaching a vanquished king from the most visible sign of his former legitimacy, the royal temple and the state deity. Thus, the act of temple destruction was well established within the Indian political rhetoric. So it was not a new thing for the Mughal emperors. And when it comes to Aurangzeb, few temples are very prominent, which are discussed highly in media, which are Keshavdeva temple and Vishwanatha temple, and we'll discuss them one by one. There are a lot of stories surrounding the destruction of these temples. As I mentioned, the scholars like Jadunath Sarkar and Munni Lal present a different narrative. They say that they demolished it because they belonged to the infidels, to the Hindus. But there's another story behind it, which usually these historians do not focus on. This temple, Vishwanath temple, was built by Raja Jai Singh. Raja Jai Singh was a person who was in alliance with Aurangzeb, and he was in the Mughal court. On the other hand, there was this guy called Shivaji, and the Shivaji was fighting against Aurangzeb in the War of Succession. But what happened, this Raja Jai Singh and Shivaji, both of them were Rajputs, and he was trying to bring a kind of alliance between these two people. So Shivaji used to visit the court, and they used to have conversations, but eventually that didn't go well, and Shivaji was imprisoned for some time in Agra. But allegedly Jai Singh helped him to escape the prison, and as a result, Aurangzeb destroyed this Vishwanatha temple, which was rebuilt by Jai Singh. Again, there is this Keshavdeva temple, which was again, it was patronized by Dara Shikoh. As I mentioned earlier, that Dara Shikoh was the person who was his competitor during the Wars of Succession, and eventually he killed Aurangzeb killed Dara Shikoh. So it was patronized by Dara Shikoh, and it was in Mathura, and the Brahmins of Mathura were also involved in the escape of Shivaji, which I mentioned earlier. Besides that, these Jats of Mathura in 1670 started a rebellion against the empire, and eventually Aurangzeb dismantled them. And after doing this, he demolished the temple and built this Eidgah on top of that temple. Again, when it comes to temples, historian also, especially Jagannath Sarkar or Munilal or any prominent scholar who says that Aurangzeb was a religious tyrant, they ignore such documents like Banaras Farman, which he delivered in 1659 to the people of Banaras. He says in the Farman that in accordance with Holy Law, we have decided that the ancient temple shall not be overthrown, but that new one shall not be built. Again, this statement is a bit controversial, but the new one shall not be built. But it was specifically for Banaras. In other parts of the Indian subcontinent, temples were built. They were commissioned by Aurangzeb as well. And again, he says, no person shall in unlawful ways interfere or disturb Brahmins and other Hindu resident in these places. So they may, as before, remain in their occupation and continue with peace of mind to offer up prayers for the continuance of our God-given empire. And personally, I think the word to offer up prayers is a huge word for a radical fundamentalist when he's using against a Hindu or a non-Muslim. So you cannot expect this word from a religious fundamentalist to say. Again, when he started annexing Golconda and Bijapur, the areas in the Deccan region in 1687, he didn't demolish any temples. Usually we mention just a dozen of them, but we ignore that he patroned thousands of temples. There were more than 1,000 temples in India at that time, but he demolished just dozens, and people ignore the reasons behind those demolition. He was a protector of temples, and he adopted a policy to ensure the well-being of Hindu religious institutions and their leaders. He issued dozens of orders that directed officials to shield temples from unwanted interference, granted land to Hindu communities, especially in Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra, and provided stipends to Hindu spiritual figures as well. You can see, for instance, in the 9th century of his reign, Aurangzeb dispensed a farman to the Umanand temple at Gauti in Assam, confirming an earlier land grant and the associated right to collect revenue. 1680, he directed the Bhagavat Gosain, a Hindu ascetic who lived on the banks of Gangas in Banaras, should be kept free from harassment. 1687, the emperor gave some empty land on a ghat in Banaras to Rami Javan Gosen in order to build houses for pious Brahmins and holy faqirs. So he has done a lot of such things. He supported the Balaji temple construction by giving fund and people support. He gifted rent-free land to Brahmins. We have a lot of examples. Again, he reassured in 1661 that the Jagam is a sect within Hindu community, that he said that they should be given lands as was promised by his ancestors. So he usually assisted them in building their temples, and as long as they were living in peace. Again, if we look at his state bureaucracy, he was not like, he didn't dismantle all the non-Muslim clerks from his court with one stroke of his pen, as Jadunal Sarkar mentions. But on the contrary, during his time, the number of Mughal nobility was increased from 21% to 31%. And he also appointed non-Muslims to very high positions, like as French traveler Francois Bernaire mentions that the Raja Raghunath was a wazir when he was visiting India. And again, if we see the wars of succession, he was supported by 21 Hindu nobles, and Dara Shikoh was also probably like supported by the same figure, like 24 Hindu nobles. So we don't find much a difference in it.
Farid, sorry to interrupt. 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. Okay, okay, I'll leave it. If someone asks question, I will talk about the Jizya tax. And again, he was. We should remember that he was a cruel emperor. He even dealt with the Muslim ulama in the same way he dealt with his Hindu enemies. He once his teacher comes to the darbar, and he was looking for a mansab in the darbar for a higher position. And then he says, "Why should give me a reason that I should give you a position in the darbar? You have wasted my time by teaching me Arabic." Sorry, guys. That you and I have come to know that you cannot learn it even after you interact with the people for 12 or 13 years. You have just wasted my time. Instead of telling me how to draft strategy, how to take lanes, how to deal with different people, you taught me this thing. So this was useless. So finally, I conclude that the imposition of the idea of religious tyrant and Muslim fanatic on Aurangzeb seems more an exaggeration by historians, especially like Jadunat Sarkar. And I believe that they were operating under the colonial rule. If we see their timeline, they wrote the books during 1923, 28, 27. So they were influenced by this colonial divide and rule idea. And then the act of temple desecration was not a new thing. It was well established within the Indian political rhetoric, and we do not find any evidence of I'm forgetting the word. Sorry, trying to eliminate the non-Muslims from the Indian community. And again, the word. The last thing is Hindu. Again, Hinduism is a colonial term. The Hindus, which we call them Hindus nowadays, used to identify themselves as based on race, based on creed, like Rajputs, Maharathas. They never mentioned themselves as Hindus. So it's a colonial term. So even saying that he was against Hindus is a problematic word. Thank you so much. I'll try to accommodate your questions. If there is any, I'm short of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid. Thank you so much. So we move on to Anila's presentation, or last speaker, Anila Bano, a GPISH student from IIS.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anila, and I begin by expressing my solidarity with individuals and communities facing significant challenges around the world. My topic today is Sandi and Sende, and I'm honored to share some of my learnings with you all today. Over this past summer, I got to explore some of the impacts of floods and landslides in Sandi Yasin, which is a village in the northern areas of Pakistan. In case you are curious of the word Sende in the title, it means river in Brusheski language, which is a local language spoken by most of the people in this region. You know, if you are wondering why I'm exploring the impacts of floods and landslides in this region, I should note that while some of the impacts of natural disasters are very obvious, I believe that it's very important for us to dig deeper into some of the challenges faced by local communities, especially as if they are challenges that are global, because we have to contextualize them based on different places. So I will give you a little bit of a background into the study site, that is Sandi Yasin. I'll share with you some of my research questions and sub-questions, the methodology I used, findings thus far, and I say thus far because I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in this context and related contexts about this topic, as well as next steps. As I mentioned earlier, Sandi is one of the large villages in Yasin Valley that is located in Gilgit-Baltistan in the northern areas of Pakistan. It is surrounded by mountains and is situated very close to glaciers. It has 3 rivers flowing through it. I was able to gather the names of 2 of the rivers called Asumbarokh and Qorqoltiokh, and these names are based on the places from which these rivers flow. Asumbarokh and Qorqoltiokh, they merge at the junction of Upper Sandi or Dal Sandi and Lower Sandi or Khat Sandi, and then they later meet the 3rd river that flows from different villages like Barkolti, Thui, and Darkut. I do mention these rivers because these are where the floods happen, and the landscape is important to keep in mind as we are trying to understand some of these global issues. While it's tempting to think of solutions for some of these problems, my goal of this study was not to seek solutions. It was also not to recommend what best approaches to be taken in this context, but it was rather to really gain a good understanding of the challenges of a context. And because I had limited time over the summer, I chose to choose a location that I am most familiar with and to do an in-depth analysis and understanding of the context from where I come from. And I think that's important as we are trying to also serve the community. I would also like to take this, I also wanted to take this opportunity to see this research as a stepping stone for my thesis next year. So this is not a one-time study, but I'd like to build on it, and I am looking forward to your feedback and comments in that regard as well. As I mentioned earlier, some of global issues like natural disasters are dependent, their impacts are dependent upon context. So I took Sandi as a context because it is still considered a remote village in the northern areas, and very little research has been done in this context, and very little knowledge is available to the public. Therefore, I wanted to take the opportunity of doing a little bit of research in Sandi to hopefully then gain a broader understanding of similar geographies and contexts as we are trying to make sense of global issues like natural disasters. And I think it's also important to promote and also understand some of other areas that are linked with issues like natural disasters. Those could be the landscape of the region, the culture, the challenges, as well as the opportunities that communities from a mountain community or other contexts have and can face. Through this small project, I realized that it's very important for us to reflect and be mindful of our own positionality as we are working or researching with individuals and communities in a certain region. Therefore, I tried my best to be aware of my own position in this study, and I was open to surprising findings. So we'll get back to that. Over this past summer, I spent a month in Sandi, Yasin, and I conducted semi-structured interviews with mostly men aged 30 to 90 years old. The format was such that I had some guiding questions, but they were not bound to answer to only the questions I was asking. In fact, some people even started talking before I asked a simple question, because I created that space for open sharing, and I wanted to learn the intersectionalities and the multifaceted nature of these challenges that communities in this context may face. And because that place is my hometown, it so happened that none of the people I talked to were strangers, but I should mention that none of them were relatives either. Along with these semi-structured interviews, I also based this study on observations made by others as well as myself related to this topic. And I thought it was very important to take into account the lived reality of the people of this region as it relates to the impacts of natural disasters, which might seem obvious in some sense. So Sandi from Sende, that's the bold word I've used in the title. And I put it there for a reason, because I had previously heard that the name of this region, Sandi, is related to Sende, or river in the local language. But I had no opportunity to ask more people about it. So through this research, I was able to ask people what they think about the relationship between Sandi and Sende. And the interviews reflected a repeated mention of this historical connection between Sandi and Sende. And here's an example of a quote that I have just added here for your reference. But people kept saying that this region is called Sandi because it was once upon a time filled with water. And people were kind enough and generous enough, and I'm really grateful for that they were sharing their observations as well, because they are there, they can see, what are some of the evidences. But again, this study was not scientific, so I'm not saying that this is a scientific fact, quote scientific, because I do believe that these things are important to take into account along with the quantitative scientific data, because it's built on local knowledge, and the people who live there know best what their local reality is. I'm sorry, I just realized that there was a slide skipped for my research questions. So in general, it was about how this area is impacted by natural disasters, and that I sort of categorized in the past and present, but also challenges and opportunities, because these impacts are dependent upon understanding the history, both in the past and also then looking at how things are in the present. So this slide was related to my subsidiary question of what is the history of floods in Sandi, and this is regarding what is the present situation in the region. So based on my interviews, observations, and the lived reality of the region, I found that floods and landslides are a repeated risk to the village, washing away buildings, trees, and leaving the land barren. And because of the time limitations, I won't be able to expand on a lot of this, but I'm happy to get to more of the findings in our panel discussion and Q&A. Yet at the same time, I want to point out that there were people mentioning that these are challenges, but at the same time, they were helped by organizations. and they were grateful for that. And again, we can go into how organizations are helping. But people have, based on my observations, have tried to rebuild as there was a significant flood in 2010 in the region. And I could see that people were talking positively about it, that yes, in the immediate aftermath of the floods, it was hard. People faced challenges, but things didn't stay the same, right? They were able to rebuild, collaborate, get help from external support as well. And the lands that were barren they were able to rebuild, so they could again do agriculture and grow trees. I could see that people had relocated to different places than their original places. And some were talking positively about it, while others were again expressing how challenging such moments of crisis can be, especially in the immediate aftermath. My other subsidiary question was related to how people are perceiving these climatic events. And based on the interviews, I learned that people's perceptions reflect changed or changing climatic conditions, and these perceptions are not always negative. As based on my positionality, I will mention that this was a surprising finding for me to learn that people were perceiving benefits of natural disasters. One example would be a quote from a respondent that said that, these floods brought stones, big and small stones. And for those who can speak Khwar and Brushski here might understand what I mean by small stones, bajri, which are used to build houses. And so that was helpful. They saw it as a benefit of getting access to these things that they can then build further from. Another surprising finding for me, was a conversation I had with one of the respondents who mentioned that in their area there was a water shortage before the floods, but after the floods they experienced some relief from the water shortage, and also the growth of local plants based on people's observations, which are called papak. As part of the next steps on this study, I would like to study neighboring villages and expand this study. I would like to interview more people and a diverse group of participants, so diverse group of people can engage in the discussions on this topic. While this study was qualitative, I would like to couple it with quantitative data to get a sense of it from the quantitative side of things. And I would also like to consult organizations working on natural disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anila. My job has been very, very easy. They're very good with timekeeping. So we have ample time as a result for discussion and for the questions and comments, but I'm going to use my own privilege as the chair of the panel, and I'm going to start with my own questions. So let me go with the order of presentations. So Zeinab, as you can imagine, this is a topic particularly close to my field and my heart, if I may say. Just a question of maybe curiosity, because it has been one of your cases in the Iran-Iraq war. It has been like 3 decades since the war, and there's been an increasing amount of publications on the war. So it's not like we are lacking narratives of the war, the experiences. I was wondering if some of the oral narratives, accounts of this sexual violence that happened during the war, been documented in at least some of these academic publications. That's one question. Another question, although you didn't mention it, but it's in your abstract, you mentioned about this book, A Woman in Berlin, and how this book, I suppose, started your interest in this topic. So I was just curious to know, how that happened, why this book, and how it led you to look at the cases that you're working on in the case of Middle East. Farid, very interesting paper. And I think in a way, partly it speaks to Fatima's paper from the previous panel in terms of representation of Muslims in contemporary India, but in this case, of course, a historical figure. So you talk about, very briefly about, you talked about these contemporary narratives and use and perhaps misuse of Aurangzeb and his policies. I was wondering how contemporary are these narratives or references to him? I mean, is it, after Modi came to power, or were these narratives always there in some way? Do we, see a change perhaps in time in terms of historical references to Aurangzeb in particular, but to the Mughal history in general? And finally, Anila, thank you so much. Again, a very, very timely topic. We were just discussing about the floods in Central Europe and UK over lunch with my colleagues. So thank you very much. And you mentioned at the end of your presentation that you want to expand this to nearby villages. But again, I read in your abstract that you have already done that partially, because you have done a similar research in another village, right? In Batswat in 2018. And if I'm not mistaken, you have done a TED talk about that. So are there any preliminary comparative, observations that you draw from those two research experiences in different villages? And I was also wondering, in your interviews and communications with conversations with your interlocutors, has global warming as a term come up? Do they make such kind of global references while, talking about what they have experienced in the case of the recent flood? Thank you very much. So I'll leave the floor to Zeinab.
Thank you for your question. Well, for your first question, yes, we have abundance of unofficial narratives. We have lots of books published by Iranian writers inside Iran that they're talking about rapes, and it has been somehow a justification for our political state to somehow honor themselves, defend the honor of women, and also in line with that, defend the sovereignty of our country. So it has been like something has been told over the time. People know about that, but there is no official records on that. For example, Martyr's wife talks about the motivation of her husbands to go to the war because he has heard about a gang rape to an 11-year-old daughter, and after that she was being raped. Her father killed her in front of the Iraqi soldiers, for example, and that really depressed all the officials, and this news has been spread among many people, and that was some of the reasons that they wanted to defend, for example, a part of Khorramshahr. But never, because of the sensitivities of the area, they never documented any official record.
How about academic works, though?
Actually, I have searched some academic things. All of them agree on this fact, that there are little to none official records. But at the same time, they're somehow basing their arguments on the narratives when we don't have any official records. And since the conflict zone of Iran-Iraq has been so sensitive, there was always some political barriers between the Iranian officials that they never allowed these recordings to be published and get somehow an official sense. For your second question, well, initially I wanted to talk about a woman in Berlin, and it's a recount of women in Germany who has been raped by the Russian soldiers, and the numbers of the women who have been raped was like a lot. But, there were a lot of discussions on that, and many people talk about this, and it somehow turned into a fact for them because it's official. But because of the sensitivities of the Middle Eastern context, most of the narratives of sexual violence during the war has been buried under political, cultural, and religious sensitivities of our context. So I somehow, although it was somehow a motivation for me to build my argument, but I said that, okay, many people have worked on that. And in order to follow that Eurocentric mode, I started to work on much more contextual base of myself, which is like Iran-Iraq war, and also the current war that has been taking place. And whichever side that you talk about, there is some atrocities and allegations. So I thought that it's much better to draw attention on these conflicts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question, Professor. You asked about the history of this controversy, or like this anti-Muslim mentality, how contemporary this is. And I think like this is not a new phenomena. It was there in India from the beginning. Even we have heard of about RSS, the Rashtriya Samak Sangh, and it is the same group of people who killed Gandhi. He allegedly killed Gandhi because Gandhi was protesting for the money that was supposed to be given to Pakistan, and this guy was mentioning that he's supporting Muslims, and that's why he killed Gandhi. But this was there, but this was not very prominent in the whole of Indian community. But with the BJP, a nationalist party, we might also say a fascist kind of party, he acted as a catalyst for the process, and he brought steps like removing the mole history from the textbooks, and then renaming the roads, and even he didn't criticize those people who were assaulting Muslims. So BJP has a role in it, of course. He ignited the process, and the history goes back very long. Thank you.
Regarding your first question, yes, it was a pleasure for me to study the other village a couple of years ago. But it's important for me to keep realizing that, these are some of the regions where some changes are quite drastic. Mm-hmm. So to be open, to keep an open mind regarding each context I go to has helped. And that was a realization based on this past summer's experience. As for the comparison between the two projects I did, I think it shows what I could see and what I could hear was based on these two regions, because they are both mountain communities and mountain villages very close to glaciers, is that these mountain regions are sensitive indicators of climate change, because we can see the impacts very vividly. That was evident, although people were, to respond to your other question consecutively, although people were not, explicitly mentioning words like global warming and climate change, but they kept referring to melting glaciers. Mm. In Brusheski, there's a word called ghamu for ice. So there was this 92-year-old man who kept telling me that we have this Ghamu Bar, which is the region where there was a lot of ice, and we no longer have that. We used to have bridges with ice, we could walk on ice, and now we barely see ice staying on the rivers. So people are making these observations, even if they are not explicitly saying that this is a big climatic change event. The other thing related to how people were talking about the situation is I noticed that while they are appreciating the efforts of people helping them and people helping each other, especially in the immediate aftermath of natural disasters and at the moments of crisis, I did sense the desire in people to not be reliant on external aid. And I'm quoting one of my respondents who said that unfortunately, there is this growing sense of dependency, and I think, and this is what he said, and I think that this sense of dependency is a psychological setback for the community. And I think that was in parallel to what I heard in Batsuat a couple of years ago.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thank you. Now I turn to the audience, and there's so many questions. Wow. Wow. Alrighty. I'll start with you. Oh, yes. Okay.
The authority is with you, whoever you want.
De facto. All right. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for all wonderful presentations.
Let me just say that we have so many questions, so please keep it brief.
Yes, I mean, it's not a question, but actually a comment on Anila's question, the relationship between Sindi and Sende. And these are, I mean, could be Sanskrit, but I know this is also Middle Persian or Pahlavi. The Sende, as you mentioned, is river, and Sende are people who live alongside the river. That's what the meaning of Sinde is in the case of what you presented. We have in history of Afghanistan as well, Sinbad Herati, as well Qarani Herati, who in 150 after Hijrah fought against the Arab army in Afghanistan and in Herat of that time. So this word Sindia comes from river, but it also a sub meaning of that. It also fast moving river. It could be fast moving river as well, or something fast flowing, or river that carries with it the fast moving kind of wind as well. Like the river Sind also comes from the same root of river Sind, like it itself is river. So that's people who live alongside the river is what the Sindia is. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you so much for this etymological note. Yes, we'll go to you. No? Him. Oh, sorry. I don't want to, keep him waiting any longer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have just two questions, one from Farid. I'm also a second year GPISH student and his classmate. So I remember that during the class, I had some conversation about Aurangzeb with him, and I found that Farid is quite interested about his character. And just I'm wondering that how you step away from your personal judgment and biases while you're preparing for this presentation, how you step away your judgment. And my second question is from Sophie about, you talked about this Saudia 2030 ambitious vision, and I want to know your perspective that how right it is that you are talking about calling this project very ambitious, but on the other hand, we are seeing that what's going on behind the curtain in Saudi Arabia about the censorship, about suppressing of the intellectuals and the advocates of human trafficking, and how we could call it ambitious from what perspective? Yeah.
Thank you for the amazing presentations. Well, I don't have really, I have one question and a couple of suggestions. I'll try to be quick for Anila.
Try to be also brief.
Yeah, sure. So the research that you're doing, so before coming here, I was working with the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, and I wonder if you were able to get in touch with them, because what you are doing, there is so much data with them regarding all these areas, all the vulnerabilities that exist, and also the damages that have been caused, and also what should be the next steps to sort of mitigate these vulnerabilities. So, but my question is that there is so much data out there, we know the threats. What your research will what value addition your research will make? Because you, I thought, are also going to map out all the hazards, all the disasters. So what's different? What are you contributing?
Thank you. Now let me turn to speakers. So we do a first round, and then we are going to collect more questions. Farid?
Thank you, Nazir, for the question. I'll tell you how did I start this working on this topic, and you would get to know about my biases, right? And when I started working on this topic, I was more interested in Darashiko, because Darashiko was is portrayed as a liberal person in Indian context. He wrote Majma al-Bahrain, which is a book like he talks about combining Hinduism and Islam, right? So I was more interested in him, and then I had a wish that he should have been in the throne, right? But
That's quite a bias.
yeah. But when I started working on it, I found it very different. I found that this man Aurangzeb was a good strategist, and the way people portray him as a religious tyrant, it was not like that. He was working based on realpolitik, based on his strategies. So eventually I had to change my stance, and I had to go for the other one. So but at the end of the day, you have to make a bias. You have to be with one party, right? As a social scientist, but I'm a student, of course. But like in social sciences, you have to take a bias. Now my bias has changed. Yeah. I hope you got your answer.
Thank you. Anila?
Thank you so much for the suggestion and question. I have consulted AKA before and have worked with them briefly as well. I think they are doing an awesome job in the region, and I'd commend their efforts. And I definitely, as I mentioned there, as part of the next steps for gathering more quantitative data, consult AKA, because they are doing some of the work. So that will be my step for my next year's research, inshallah. As part of as to your other question, my goal for this study was, as I said earlier, was not to seek solutions, right? It was to really deeply understand the human experience, the indigenous experience, because it's very these challenges it's easy to simplify, like floods came, houses were washed away, so what, right? It's easy to see it like that. But I really wanted to see if there is depth, there's more to learn. And through this small act of exploration, I did realize that there's many layers to how some of these things are related, very much dependent on contexts. So we can't, while there is value in generalizability generally for application, but it's very important to get a good sense of a context. So then the next steps would be, yes, then those can help inform interventions that are very anthropologically sensitive to a local context. But also, I haven't seen, at least personally, a lot of this knowledge available out there. And I think it's important, not just for people who are helping as part of the organizations, but for students like us who are interested in research and who want to add to the knowledge about these local contexts.
Thank you, Anila. Right, back to you. Yes, you're very keen.
Hello everyone, I'm Hasali, STEP first year. I just have 2 comments and I don't have a question. For Zeinab's talk, I was remembering a movie that I watched, and the scenes were very similar to what you were portraying out there. I recommend everyone to watch that movie as well. It is Incendies. It is a French movie, French-Canadian movie, and it depicts the impacts of war and of rape and sexual violence during wars.
Sorry, what's the name of the movie?
Incendies. Incendies. And another movie recommendation based on Sophie's talk. It's a new movie. It's a South Indian movie, Adu Jeevitam, and the English title is The God Life. So 2 movie recommendations from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the audience as well, not just for the speakers. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Maya. Question for Zeinab. I noticed in the presentation that you put the World War II, and then you put which included in the end of the Middle East, which is a bit weird. I found like a very unrelated to the context of the research, and also like in the presentation there was written the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, And then when referred during the speech was Israeli-Hamas war or like conflict. So my question here is like, how are you approaching this? Because it's totally, it's very sensitive area, very sensitive labeling, and at the same time, it's a pretty dangerous thing. So I really want to understand, like, how did you approach this? What are like the methodology you followed? And also, did you consider any reports? Like, I really appreciate that you mentioned like the sexual assaults and rape on women. But what about the children and men that are being raped, especially like the Palestinian detainees? So this second question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to turn here. Matthew?
For Farid, you mentioned that historians say this about Aurangzeb. My question's quite simple. Which historians? So I'm really interested to hear. I think this historiography of Aurangzeb in the 20th century is very interesting. I'd like to hear more about if you see a contrast between, say, European historiography and South Asian historiography. I think there's a lot of interesting things to unpack there. Thank you.
So I'm going to collect one more question and then we'll go to the speakers.
I'm Samia from UCL, and my question is from Zeinab. As you selected two different case studies, for me it's a question that how you manage the data flow of the two case studies with all the similarities and what were the differences, and was it easy to cover these two areas at a time? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go again in order. Zeinab?
Thank you for your questions. Okay. Maya, thank you for your question. Well, actually, primarily, as I told, I wanted to include World War II and then highlight the fact that many narratives have been suppressed from the Middle Eastern context. When you're talking about the war, this is something natural. And like there is mass murder, rape, victimization, everything is natural. But when you're talking about something like World War II, although that is such a catastrophe, but again, it has been told lots of times. But I omitted it in my whole presentation. But I wanted to stress upon the fact that there are lots of buried proofs that has to be talked about in the Middle Eastern context. And also you asked me about the methodology that how I found all these datas. Well, my main initiative is that I used somehow a comparative case study, and through finding the narratives and testimonies of the victims and all the people who have narrated and somehow transferred these into our literature or our political narratives, how they politicians use these narratives as a form of their tool to somehow use it as a motivation for war and continuing the war. At the same time, after the peace negotiations, they somehow cut all those narratives and they say that you have to be silenced. So although it's a really difficult task, you somehow have to be so sensitive to different materials, because when you're talking about one side, you have to take into account the other side of the war as well, which is really hard to find, especially in the context of Iran and Iraq, since both of them are Muslims, they're neighbors, and after Iraq's invasion by US, they had such a good relationship together. So a lot of narratives have been suppressed, and it's really, you have to somehow navigate your way through these unofficial narratives. And there, as your question, sorry, what was your name? Samia. Well, actually, it's really important to understand the sensitivities, as I showed in one of those slides, that many people somehow, because they're supporting the resistance, they're at the same time, they have to take into account the systematic use of rape in international wars, especially by Hamas. And sometimes, yeah, I use intersection, like together, Hamas, then I use Palestinians, but I meant that whatever that happens by the states, by some political parties, in reality, it is the people who are affected rather than those political parties and the people in power. So it's better to look, not to look at it from like that mainstream international relation thing, but to look at it from the beyond, from gender perspective, that many people and civilians have been affected by that, no matter you're supporting the axis of resistance or you're supporting the IDF forces. In both cases, you have to show that, you have to somehow prove that it's important to find facts. It's important to be fair during all these conflicts, and that use of rape should not be somehow justified by all those historical dynamic of violence. There was one question of you that I forgot. Yes.
Very briefly, Zeinab.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, there are lots of narratives of child abuse and sexual assaults against males, especially right now. There are lots of official records on Palestinian hostages by IDF soldiers, but actually the scope of my research is limited to feminist and female hostages and women affected through the dynamic of honor and patriarchy. Yeah, but it needs a lot of investigation on that as well. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, regarding which historians I was referring to, I had mentioned in my presentation two prominent figures. One of them was Jadunat Sarkar and the other Munni Lal. I mentioned that in the first few slides, and then I was referring to them as these scholars. My apologies if I just mentioned historians. Like I was mentioning that these historians. So I tried to counter the narrative which is built by the non-Muslim Indian historians. So yeah, that was what around which my argument was based. Yeah, thank you.
Anila, you wanna reflect on question? Okay. Oh, sorry. It's chairs. Okay. So let me, before going back to the audience here, I just want to make sure that participants online don't think that they're forgotten. So we have a comment from Hussein to Farid. Actually, he's mentioning about some documents published in 1980s about Aurangzeb that could be useful for your research.
Okay. Anila, I'm wondering whether you have seen over time, or whether you can foresee in the future, whether the communities that you're looking at will interpret the causes of these changes in a certain way. And I mean, whether in your view, it will be important, whether climate change as they experience it, for good or for bad, is down to human caused reasons or human agency, or whether it's something that comes from nature or perhaps from God or some kind of above. And is there some kind of present interpretation, or do you see some interpretation given to this? I'm thinking communities can say, well, this is we are being victims of other people's crimes, or is this punishment for our own crimes, or is this we are being blessed by nature, right? So how are these communities interpreting, in other words, the changes that they're experiencing?
Thank you. Can we collect the question? This is the last question.
Hi, I have a question for Zeinab and a question-ish for Anila.
As long as it's brief.
Yes. So Zeinab, I was wondering whether in the case of Iran-Iraq war, whether you found any sort of references to race. Was there any racial element to sexual violence? And I'm thinking here of what's now referred in Bangladesh as the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, in which we now know that the Pakistani dictator at the time, Aga Khan, used rape as he called it he wanted to wipe out the Bangladeshi Nasr, which in English would be genocide. And rape for him was the tool for genocide of the Bangladeshi people. So that for Zeinab and Anila, what I found interesting the most in your presentation is the surprising findings, as you termed them, that people actually saw the floods as filling a lack that they were facing. And I'm just wondering, is there any historicity to the lack itself? How do they view so if they were lacking bajri, or if they were lacking water, is there any history of where the water shortage and where the lack of bajri is coming from? I think that would be a nice thing to explore further. If you don't know right now, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anila, shall we start with you this time?
Sure. Yeah, I think the answer to Uzair is quite simple, so I don't know. It would
Brilliant,
be fun.
very short answer.
In response to Dr. Umar, thank you so much for both of your questions. I don't have enough like quote unquote data to make a solid comment regarding it, but what I have heard, because you said according to my perception and what I have heard, is there is this element of belief in God as the master of everything. So I heard people making comments such as nothing would happen if God hadn't willed it. And even like something interesting, at least from this summer, was somebody said how there is this local perception that if a house is left, it's more prone to be wiped away. So if nobody lives there, it's like, and I heard this from 2 to 3 different people who interpreted it as a way of saying that if you are leaving this house empty, you are sort of giving it to nature. And so then it's God, so it will be wiped away. So these were just some comments I heard. But interestingly, I haven't, at least in this context, learned and heard a lot about the global climate change as a cause of these issues. And I wonder if it's because of lack of awareness regarding what's happening around the globe, because Sandi, as I mentioned earlier, is still considered one of the remote region with very limited digital access.
Okay, Zeinab.
Try to make a short answer. Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, yeah, rape in wars has been used as a source of ethnic cleansing, and it's a source of genocide. But in the case of Iran-Iraq war, it was mainly rather sort of a battle between Shia and Sunnis. Some of the dominant narratives said that, okay, we can make this war and we can send Shia Iraqi soldiers to Iran so that these Shias get into the war together, and we watch them how they destroy each other. And one important narrative among the women during the time of the invasion of Khorramshahr, the south of Iran, where most of the ethnicity of that people, the population are Arabs, they thought that, women thought that, okay, we're Arabs, we're talking in Arabic, so we don't think that they're gonna do anything to us. But actually, it was not the case for them. It was like the whole totality of the political ideology of that of the state at that particular time that was the target of the war rather than a racial thing. So it was like Shia and like in broader sense political Islam in the 12th Imam's doctrines.
Thank you so much. And can we give, please, them a round of applause? They've done brilliantly, really, and not just in presenting, but also in the way they reacted to the questions. Well done.